In today's lesson, we are going to be looking at simple interest. So this is our first lesson in the finance unit, and we're going to be looking at different types of interest. The first one we're going to look at is the simple interest. Now, simple interest is calculated as a percentage of the principal or initial or starting amount So calculate as a percentage of the starting amount on an investment or loan using the formula I equals PRT, where I is the interest, which is accumulated over time. P is what we call the principal, or the original amount. R is the rate, or the interest rate, expressed as a decimal. And T is the time, and we express it in terms of years. So it's a very relatively straightforward formula with different variables, and we're going to be given most of the different pieces of information. Now, simple interest is then added to the principal to determine the total amount. So this formula only tells us how much interest we earn. It doesn't tell us what our new final amount is. So we have to make sure that we add it to our initial amount to get the total amount. When we're dealing with the interest rate, or R, remember, we need to express our rates as a decimal. So we're going to usually be given the percent or the interest rate as a percent. We need to convert it to a decimal. So just remember that percent means out of 100. So when I find all my percents, or if I'm given my percents and I want to find the decimal, I have to divide it by 100. So I take 13% divided by 100, and I get 0.13. Same thing with the next one, I get 0.025. And then last one for 0.5%, 0.005. Right, so to find the decimal version of the percent, we just divide it by 100. For time, right, time we want to always express time in terms of years, especially for this scenario. So we need to convert time in terms of years. So what we have to do is we need to divide whatever our units is. So in this case, we're dealing with months. So we need to divide it by how many months there are in a year. And in this case, there are 12 months in a year. So 24 divided by 12 gives me 2 years. 14 weeks divided by 52 weeks in a year gives us, bring up my calculator, so 14 divided by 52, this works out to 7/26, so that's just a reduced form, and we want to leave it as a fraction unless we can reduce it to an exact value. So unless we can, unless this works out to a nice decimal, I would want to just leave it as the fraction of 7/26. Now, depending on the calculator you're using, you can enter in fractions, hopefully. And then 82 days, we divide it by 365. 82 divided by 365 just stays as 82/365. Doesn't work out to a nice decimal, so I leave it as that fraction. So this is only if we're told we're calculating the interest for a certain period or for a time frame that is not in years. If it's in years, then we just leave it as is. Right, so again, as we just mentioned, right, it must be expressed in terms of years. So we need to convert. So if it's months, we divide by 12, weeks divide by 52, days divide by 365. So let's look at an example. So we want to calculate how much interest is earned if $2,000 is invested at 4.5% simple interest for 26 weeks. So we need to basically, I'm going to write out my variables. So I, P, R, and T. Those are my variables, the 4 variables that would be included in our simple interest formula. Now for I, the interest we don't know, that is what we're looking for. For P, P is the principal, right? So that's how much we're starting with. So $2,000 are invested. So 2,000 is my principal. My rate 4.5%. Remember, we convert that to a decimal, so divide that by 100, and we get 0.045. T is the time in years, but it's 26 weeks, so we have to do 26 divided by 52, which is half, or 0.5. So that one works nicely to a nice decimal number, an exact value, so I can leave it as the decimal. I don't have to leave it as a fraction. So now I'm going to plug this all in. So start off with my formula. I equals PRT, or equals 2,000 times the rate 0.045 times time 0.5. And I'm just multiplying those three numbers together. And I get 45. So that means the interest earned is $45. Therefore, $45 in interest is earned. B now says, how much is the investment worth? Now you might say, well, it's $45. I just calculated that. But we have to remember that the $45 is only the interest that gets added. If we're looking for what the investment is worth, we're looking for our total value. So we have to do our principal, our starting amount, plus the interest rate, or 2,000, plus the interest, sorry, not interest rate, interest. And we get $2,045. So that is the actual worth of the investment. The investment, of how much money we have saved, it's worth $2,045. Now, in some cases, we may not be using, or we may need to find other values other than just the interest. Maybe we know how much interest we earned, or we know how much interest we want to earn. So we need to figure out how long do we save it for, or we need to know what rate to find in when saving. So we can use a little bit of a triangle for that to kind of help figure out what our different formulas are. So we can have P, R, T, and then we're going to put I up here. So this is what's called a simple interest triangle. And how it's set up will allow us to figure out what the different formulas are. And the way these triangles work is we cover up what piece or what variable we want to find, and then the other part, and then how the other letters are set up are going to determine the formula. If they're beside each other, like the P, the R, and the T, it's multiplying, and if it's below the I, it's considered division. So again, just an easy way to help us rearrange without having to worry about understanding rearranging equations too much. But I'll show you an example of what I mean by that. So example 2 says, how much principal is needed to earn $50 in interest in 2 years at 2.5% simple interest? So if I write out my 4 letters, I, P, R, and T, and I fill in the information I know how much interest I have, $500. I know how long, 2 years. And I know the percent, 2.5%, which becomes 0.025. And the question is asking how much principal. So that means I don't know my P, and that's what I'm looking for. So what we can do to solve for P is we can go to our triangle over here. I'm going to cover up the variable that I'm looking for, which in this case is the P, and whatever is left is going to be my formula. So let me just set this up so I can erase it easier. So I'm going to set up my formula. So the principal is going to equal, and then whatever's left over in my triangle. I have I on top, so I divided by RT, or R times T, and that is my formula. So now I can plug in my information. So 500 goes on top, divided by 0.025 times 2. This is now a calculation. Make sure you put brackets around the entire denominator. So if you're entering this on a calculator, you would do 500 divided by, and then in brackets 0.025 times 2, close bracket, just so your calculator knows to calculate the denominator first and then do the division. If you have a calculator that allows you to put in the fraction, then by all means you can go right ahead. You don't have to worry about that. We do our calculation and we should get 10,000. So therefore, you need a $10,000 principal. Or in other words, you need to start with $10,000 to earn 500 in 2 years at this rate. Example 3, what simple interest rate is needed to get $7,000 to grow to $10,000 in 5 years? So here again, we're going to write out our letters I, P, R, and T. And we're going to read through the question and figure out, okay, which variable or what value goes with which variable. So if we go back to our question, first thing it asks is what simple interest rate is needed. So that means we don't know our R. It's asking us to find what rate we need. So we go back to the question, is needed to get $7,000. So $7,000 to grow to $10,000. So the $7,000 is what we're starting with. To grow to $10,000 means I want to have a total value of $10,000 at the end of my savings. Now, you want to be careful because that's not the interest. That's actually the total amount. So to find what the interest is, I have to do 10,000 minus the initial amount, which will equal 3,000. So this question is actually asking or saying that I want to figure out how long or what rate I'm going to need to get $3,000 in interest. And then the last part, in 5 years. So again, now we're solving for R. So we're going to go back up to our simple interest triangle. Changes. I'm going to cover up the R value now, and I'm left with I over P and T. So that means my formula to find the rate is going to be R equals I divided by P times T, which is what we see left over in this triangle. I'm just going to remove that black. Oops, too much. I can go to my formula. I can start to plug in my values. I know the I is 3,000 divided by 7,000 times 5. This, again, similar calculation to the last one. Make sure you put the denominator all in brackets so your calculator does that first. And we should get roughly 0.086, we'll say. So that means our rate needs to be 0.086, or because this is a decimal, we multiply that by 100. We need it to be 8.6%. Right. So remember, when you're calculating the rate, you're going to get your answer as a decimal, but we might want to turn it into a percent because we're asking for what the rate is. Last example, how long would it take $15,000 to grow to $2,000 at a simple interest rate of 3%? Again, we want to start off with I, P, R, and T. We're going to go through and highlight our key information and figure out what variable or letter it goes to. So the question is how long? So that means time. So we're asking for what is the time, which would mean we don't have that value. So how long would it take $15,000? So $15,000 is what, or not 15. $1,500, sorry. So that's going to be our principal. That's what we're starting with. We want it to grow to 2,000. So if I want it to grow to 2,000, that means I actually want to figure out, or I'm going to have an interest amount of $500, right? Because 1,500, start with 1,500, add 500, we get to 2,000. We know the rate is 3%. Turn that into a decimal, 0.03. Now I have everything kind of filled out. I have everything filled out except for t. I do need to figure out, though, what formula to use. So we're going to go back up. Just highlight some of this. We're going to go back up to our triangle. If I'm looking for, what was it again? Oops. Sorry for that. Give me 1 second. There we go. So if I'm looking for the time, I'm going to cover up t, and whatever's left over is going to be my formula. So here we have I over P times R. So if I go down, that is going to be my formula. Time is equal to I over P times R. So this is 500 divided by 1,500 times 0.03. 500 divided by 1,500 times 0.03. We get 11.1. So therefore, it would take 11.1 years. So 11.1 years to grow 15,000 to 2,000 at a rate of 3%. So these are all the different scenarios that we might come across when we're dealing with the simple interest formula. One, we looked at how to calculate the simple interest, and then we looked at using the formula, how can we find different variables such as the starting amount, the rate, or the time given the other pieces of information. Now again, this is one of the more simple or basic versions of interest. We will be looking at more complex ones, but this is kind of the very straightforward example of how of interest working, right? You're earning a percentage, or you're owing a percentage on an initial amount.